So I think we had
a motion.
thank you. Yeah, but we hadn't voted. Did we vote on it?
Just like reminded where we were.
Yeah, where were we? Yeah.
Item 6, moved and approved.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. And so Thomas interjected right before we got to item 7. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay. Item 7. Staff will be available to report on information for the Regional Transportation Revenue Report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the Regional Council, if you'll turn to Table 3 and Figure 1 in your Regional Transportation Revenues Report, through June, there was more than 186 million in HERF and BLT collected across the region. Of that 186 million, PAG collected about 31.5 million of that regional funding. The remainder was distributed directly to our jurisdictional partners. Regional HERF revenues were at an almost 4% increase year over year. Over the 5-year average, we stood at over 12%. And Table 4 shows HERF 12.6 in detail. Through June, we collected $31.5 million, which is 14.7% more than the ADOT official forecast and nearly 9% stronger than last year. Table 5 shows HERF 2.6 with stronger than expected collections totaling 7.1 million through June, which is 10% stronger than last year. And with Table 6 through June, PAG had over 98 million in an interest-bearing account. Most of these dollars are spoken for. In Table 7, we look at the city and town HERF distributions year to date. Table 8 shows the HERF 12.6 and 2.6 we've already seen. And additionally, we have Pima County HERF and Pima County vehicle license tax, the portion set aside for transportation use only. And table 9 has the previous 5 years and lets you see how much HERF your city or town received. Table 10 shows us gallons of gas sold in Pima County through the various fiscal years. We normally like to see about 13%, and through June, we were just under 13% for the fiscal year. And in table 11, about 123 million has been collected in TPT through June, trending for nearly 3.5% gain over the adopted budget. That also mimics the percent rise over last year's actuals, just over 3.5%. Mr. Chair, that concludes my update. Thank you.
Sir, any questions from anybody? Mayor Romero?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I see that the 2024 actuals are outpacing the budget. And what is the plan to use the surplus for the 2024 budget, and how much is that?
So Mr. Chair, Madam Mayor, currently including the 10% reserve, we see about $32 million in restricted funds that were not programmed in the fiscal 25 budget. So revenues outpaced budget by that amount. Ideally, we program those dollars during the tip cycle. And so that would be the ideal way to handle it.
So there's $32 million in above what we had projected.
In excess of what the budget was, yes. And 10% of that is a reserve amount. So the available funding, not available, but the restricted amount that's currently listed is around 20 million. So that 12 million of that is in the reserve amount that's not for programming at the moment.
Okay, so it's about $20 million that we're above.
Well, no, in total it's 32, but we have a 10% rule where we hold a certain amount of excess through that fiscal year. So Mr. Mogimi can clarify on that, but we would program that in the next tip cycle ideally.
Yeah, if I may, Mr. Chair, Mayor Romero, it's already budgeted for in the fiscal year 25. We have $32 million projected revenue and reserved in the fiscal year 25. And I believe what James is implying is that next year we'll probably be in the same situation.
Alrighty, so how do we allocate these funds for RTA projects?
So going back to the previous conversation, we have to have that discussion and decide which projects have the priority, which ones need to be completed. So same discussion as the last item on the RTA agenda.
And when do we get a chance to have that conversation?
At the next RTA board meeting.
Okay, so we are going to have a clear picture of what additional funds we're going to have in front of us so that we can decide where those funds go.
Correct. Again, it's already budgeted for in the RTA fiscal year 25 budget. Yes.
General Max.
So I get that it's in the budget. Do you know where it's budgeted, what line it's in right now? Is it in that reserve? So it's already in the reserve budget, which this board could determine if they want to spend some of the reserves.
Yeah.
Mayor Murphy.
Because, we have town codes where we have restrictions in wastewater and all those kinds of things. Is it the same, or could also the restricted reserves, that's different than, there's 32 and
There's 32 and 10. And so this goes back to the RTA board discussion. Yes, sir.
so we could use all of the 32 or protect the 10% and use the other. That's in our discretion.
So by RTA board's policy, and this is a long standing, we've always set aside 10%. So that's why there's two line items. There's 10%. And then there's also the second restricted line item. And that's based on our recent conversations, which projects are going to be eligible for that funding. So 32 million total at the board's pleasure, ensuring that that's compliant for the use of those funds.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Mayor Honey.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Certainly.
Mr. Wakini, these are funds in addition to the state and federal, the 12-6 STP, whatever monies we're getting, that PAG has over above expenses. Now, you said over above what was programmed. I mean, is there more than 32 or less? I
No,
mean, we
so-
didn't spend right to the penny.
So, yeah, Mr. Chair, Mayor, only it goes back to the question that Supervisor Scott had. So only HERF dollars have performed a little bit better, and it's about $6 million. The rest of it is all program. It's all spoken. So $6 million of HERF dollars. And then on the RTA side, it's the $32 million of reserve dollars. Other than that, the federal dollars are typically coming in at about the same, so we don't anticipate an increase in the federal dollars.
But we could have additional dollars for some of these projects we're talking about.
We're talking small amounts, but yes, the HERF dollars are typically in that $5 to $10 million potential additional dollars. And those are typically, goes back to what James was saying, those are typically they brought back to the TIP process, they're programmed through the TIP process. When we start the TIP again next year, those dollars are brought to the table.
Okay, I'm just kind of looking at, you know, any dollar that's not nailed down somewhere.
Yes.
That's more than we thought we were gonna have, whether it's PAG or RTA.
Yeah.
We need to kind of throw it in the pile. At least it's possibly available for some of the things.
But again, as a reminder, access to HERF dollars, that's managed by ADOT, that has to go through the TIP process.
So, Mr. Chair,
Please.
our staff have informed us that the TIP subcommittee is not allowed to program RTA revenue in the TIP. So again, what process do we use? This board, PAG, both PAG board and RTA board, like Mayor Honey said, to be able to program money into the remaining projects that are realistically ready to be constructed. Because what we have been informed, and I don't know, you can all go back to your TIP representatives, is that the TIP subcommittee is not allowed to program RTA funds in the TIP. And so I think that we need that clarity so that we can start answering those, but we do. Board and RTA
Right.
board can.
Yes.
So we have to have that conversation in terms of like, where are the monies? Where are the not stapled dollars that we can use to be able to start delivering the RTA one project as much as we can, right? They need to be tangible, construction ready projects that we can deliver to the voters.
Sure, be happy to answer that. So the TIP process is a PAG process, PAG and RTA being separate entities. During the TIP process, we only identify funds to match the ballot amount. Anything above and beyond the ballot is at the discretion of the RTA board. So we need direction from RTA board before we can go back and amend the TIP. Otherwise, there's no understanding of where the board wants to spend those dollars.
Any other questions, comments?
I have one.
Go ahead, Mayor Honey.
More of a comment. It's up until June 30th, 2026. Pretty much any revenues, PAG or RTA, unattached, didn't spend for some reason or whatever. You know, if we could kind of, I know it's a big ask, but kind of where is it? And is there money on something else that we're not going to be able to spend? You know, we roll it over in our budgets if we're going to do it, but you know, at 26, this RTA the RTA one is done. I know it's PAG meeting, Mr. Chairman, but RTA next is a whole different tax. You know, it's a whole different program. They're not mingled. We can co-mingle them if we want to push stuff into it or whatever, but you know, I just, if there's revenue is kind of in crisis mode right now. And if there's a couple of million here and there, it might not be enough to do a project, but if we start adding some of this stuff together, you know, I'd kind of like to be aware of any excess revenues. I mean, I didn't realize we were going to have this much money left over in PAG. And I know there were restrictions on some.
Yeah. So, Mr. Chair, Mayor Mahoney, if I may, so we've already put out the request to all the entities to identify which projects they anticipate that they can close, and if there's budget remaining on those projects, that hopefully they will inform us. Unfortunately, and I'm looking at Rick, I think we only got a few $1 million in responses, so that will be identified through the TIP process. So if there's a few $1 million savings on one project, you can move it to a different project during the TIP process. That whole TIP process starts again in May, so we'll go through that and identify any additional HERF dollars or federal dollars that can be used on other projects. But that's usually during the TIP process, and we're required to follow the TIP process because it's federal and state dollars.
It seems to me we've heard that $32 million figure as likely being consistent for 2 consecutive years, right?
Most likely, yes.
Therefore, that's $64 million that could go towards the $195 million shortfall.
Correct. That's our hope as well.
Okay.
Sure.
Mr. General Maxwell.
I just want to confirm, so that reserve money is money that we as an entity have programmed it as reserves in the budget.
You have budgeted as a reserve, yes.
Call reserve equal to contingency?
In this case, because we have statute provisions to meet, I would say it's reserved for purposes that are eligible to use those.
Okay,
funds
so
for.
not necessarily to be used
contingency.
elsewhere. I just want to make sure, because I mean, we learn something new every day, and I just learned that we put 32 million every year in reserves. And to Mayor Honey's point, at this point, it's all hands on deck.
Mr. Chairman, we were gonna get out of here in a hurry, and I'm talking more than anybody. No, but the 32 million is excess over estimated expenses. How much money is already in the reserve?
Budgeted.
So the fact,
Well, I mean, in the reserve, how much, we set aside 10%. Is there 30 million in there already?
no,
Plus
so,
the 232s or something?
yeah, Mr. Chair, if I may again, so annual budget, we project the revenue, project all expenses, and fiscal year 25. After the expenses, we identified a $10 million reserve and a $20 million restricted reserve. So that's where the 30 million comes from. So next year, we anticipate if our revenue holds, we're probably going to be close to that number, potentially maybe even higher if we have less number of projects to identify for expenditures.
Mr. Chairman.
But transit is the biggest one. I'm
To
sorry.
expand on, the chairman is a school teacher, I'm not, but you know, we're talking 10 and 20 is 30 and 10 and 20 is 30 and 30 and 30 is 64, 30.
Yeah.
I mean, all of a sudden, we're at $100 million.
Well, that's,
I mean, you know, it's, we could bury it in a, you know, in a can, but at December 30th, 2026, the clock stops.
Mr. Chair, Mayor Honey, that's why the audit team came back with 149 as the number. That they have 149 as unidentified number.
Okay, minus 64.
No,
It's from the 195.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. 195 is our number. Once you add roughly 60, you get back to that 149 roughly.
But then you talked about restricted reserves and 10 million. I'm wanting to take another 60 off of it.
I agree. And Mr. Chair, if I could I just want to confirm, you said, you know, we plan the revenues and the expenses, and then these reserves are planned. These are a planned item.
In the
We put
budget.
it- So it's, you make them work, because it's not you add up all your expenses and then say, oh, we got 30 million left over. It's a planned 30 million that you're going to put in the reserves.
In this case, yes. Yes.
I just want to make sure it's a plan. It's not we've got more revenues than we had expenditures. It is as they build the budget, they put that 30 million aside for revenues.
Thank you, General Maxwell. Mayor Murphy.
And just to clarify, we don't have 10 years worth of these reserves built up, right? I think that's what Mayor Honey was going to. We're two at the most, right?
So we got fiscal year 26 remaining. So after this year, fiscal year 26, and that's the end of RTA 1.
Right, but we don't have this reserve back from 2019.
No, it's annually programmed. It's in the budget.
And what do we do? So to the question, what do you do if we don't spend the reserves?
You can spend it in the following year. I mean, so as you see, we have a 5-year plan. So the RTA will have a fiscal year 27, 28, 29, and you can spend those dollars in those future years.
So let me mention one other thing from this document. If you look at table number 1, underneath table number 1, there's an asterisk that notes that only STBG greater than 200,000 is shown and not STB sub-allocated to urban areas with lower population thresholds. So that's about 75% of our total STBG. Just in the interest of time, could the regional council get a complete breakdown of the federal funding coming into the region and its uses? I recognize the language in the asterisk and that it's reported because that's the funding that you can use for RTA projects, but would still like to get that more complete.
Yeah, I have to go back and talk to staff about how it was differentiated, but I assume that's probably what it is, that those are the dollars programmed to RTA projects. Do you have that answer?
I don't have the STBG answer.
Okay.
Sorry, yeah.
Can we get it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Thank you.
If I may add to that, yeah, so
Thank
in terms of the SDBG, we receive the funding in 3 different population buckets. And we program 100% of our, what's called obligation limitation, that 15.5 or 6 billion to fulfill RTA commitments. The remainder of the smaller population buckets we use for PAG OWP operations, or we have released some of the funds for calls for projects as well.
I appreciate that very much. And again, just I can only imagine what goes into having to put together these packets, but that kind of information I think is good for us to have beforehand. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Anything else under item number 7? And that was an information item. Item number 8, 2055 Regional Mobility and Accessibility Plan Development Update. Ms. Oden, you win the title of most patient person in. What about us? You had patient.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, members of the PAG Regional Council. So I am not Jeanette, but my name is Hannah Oden. I'm a planning coordinator at PAG, and I will be providing a status update on the development of the 2055 Regional Mobility and Accessibility Plan, or the RMAP as I'll refer to it as during my presentation, which is the federally required long-range transportation plan for the PAG region. All right, so I'm just going to start by sharing some committee updates since the last regional council meeting. So the RMAP working group, they were hard at work, meeting and discussing the plan. That group continued meeting through August. Since the group started meeting, there was a total of 7 meetings. So productive one-on-one conversations and meetings with member jurisdictions to really refine the RMAP project list, to ensure that it meets both the fiscal constraint and also included high priority projects for member agencies. And the working group did recommend approval of a draft project list at their August meeting. So big thanks to all those representatives. It was a big lift and a big effort. And the working group also reviewed and recommended performance targets associated with the RMAP performance measures, as well as the fiscal constraint number and financial plan methodology, which I'll provide a little more detail on during my presentation. The PAG data science team also provided updates on the land use model and activity-based model to the working group, which is a critical component of the RMAP, those 2 models. We also shared public outreach updates, which I'll also provide more detail on later in my presentation. The biggest TPC update is that the project list was approved at that meeting in August. So this was a really critical approval needed to begin the modeling work essential to the RMAP to move forward to the next stages of the planning process. All right, and this slide just shows some background and updates on the financial plan. So the original forecasts were developed in March of 2021. A comparison of methodologies and aggregate forecast amounts by funding source was provided at the July 2022 TPC meeting. The TPC approved the underlying framework in January of 2023, and revisions were taken to TPC last month in August of 2024. So since January 2023, related to that framework, just some updates. So we updated the official HERF forecast from ADOT updated the official RTA forecast from the Eller Business Research Center, updated federal funding to reflect current apportionments, and also included revisions to the local funding contributions and grants and based on discussions with member agencies. All right, and this slide just shows a comparison of a forecast from the for the 2055 RMAP currently under development and the 2045 RMAP update, which was adopted by the Regional Council in 2020. Just so some key points and takeaways from this slide, the fiscal constraint for the 2055 RMAP is $16.2 billion based on the forecasted revenue, and this was $15.1 billion in the 2045 RMAP update. The 2055 RMAP also has a 30-year planning horizon, while the previous plan had a 25-year planning horizon. The 2055 forecast that used more authoritative and cooperatively determined forecasts for funding sources, rather than the in-house forecasts that were more relied on for the 2045 RMAP update. Adjustments were also made to local funding contributions based on jurisdictional input, and that figure was higher in the last RMAP, as you can see on this slide. All right, so moving on to model development. So these inputs are critical to the RMAP of development and the associated analysis. So we do work closely with member jurisdictions as part of the modeling process for inputs and data verification and validation as well. So the land use model inputs include population projections of known projects, including both residential and employment projects and redevelopment. The activity-based model, or ABM, so that includes socioeconomic data, employment data, as well as transit and roadway. All right, so I'm going to move on to more of the public outreach and survey promotion side. So this is a brief summary of the public outreach that promoting the RMAP survey. So we received a total of 4,481 responses as part of that effort. So it was almost 5,000. So we're excited about that number. And the survey was open for 6 weeks. So it ran from June into July. There was both a paid and non-paid multimedia campaign, which included English and Spanish radio, print, TV, and digital ads, as well as digital kiosks. A news release was sent to local media, and the survey was promoted in 7 articles and news interviews as well. We also relied heavily on community organizations, local businesses, and government offices to help us promote the survey. A variety of organizations were targeted, such as the Chambers of Commerce, local nonprofit groups, neighborhood groups, and associations, and many more. Those were just to name a few. And we also promoted the survey at some in-person events. These are really meant to target low-income, minority, senior, and limited English proficiency populations, just to make sure that we could ensure that all voices were heard and reached as part of this survey. So PAG staff attended events scheduled by local organizations, such as food banks, and attended events at neighborhood centers as well. So in total, as PAG staff, we attended 10 events and engaged 333 people. Paper copies of the survey were also available at all of these events, both in English and Spanish, if participants wanted to respond in that way. An additional targeted outreach is planned for next month to ensure that we reach additional community members. All right, and so this slide just shows a summary of some of the survey results related to transportation priorities. So this chart shows the overall priority ranking. So the responses were weighted, so whether it was first, second, or third. So the results provided the overall ranking for each of these 9 options. So as you can see on the slide, roadway conditions is far and away the top priority, which is probably not a surprise to you all. So with the weighting, the bar chart above does show that the roadway condition is so much higher than the others because it was the most popular first, second, and third priority. The second and the fourth priorities were all very close. So you'll see that the road intersection and safety is just barely ahead of reducing traffic congestion, and both are closely followed by reducing crosstown travel time. And the other results, as you can just go down the chart, you can see all of the options there. All right, and this is just another summary slide from the survey showing hypothetical regional budget breakdown. So users could apply dollar amounts in $1 and $10 increments up to $100 along these categories. Similar to the previous question, The most popular options, again, using these, hypothetical dollars where community members wanted to see funding allocated. The one that received the most hypothetical funding was to improve existing roads, followed by safety improvements, and then reducing congestion. So all of the 9 categories, I think there were 9, yeah, so all the categories here, so it included safety improvements, improving existing roadways, transit enhancements, reducing congestion, improving air quality, technology improvements, bicycle and pedestrian enhancements, and other roadside corridor amenities. All right, so just to wrap up the public engagement. So this is a visual recap of where we are for the 2024 RMAP engagement, but the target date of spring for 2025 for finalizing and approving the plan. So we're on track with phase 2 outreach. So this has a focus on special interest focus groups, neighborhood open houses, and additional community events. So really reaching out to folks that we felt were still underrepresented from the first round of engagement with that survey. As always, if the public has any comments or feedback, they can always stop by our office or email us at info@pagregion.com. And as I mentioned, there will be, of course, additional opportunities for public engagement. All right, and just to kind of wrap it up, kind of a high-level view of where we are with the overall RMAP timeline. So right now, with that project list approved, the data science team is getting started on the modeling effort. GIS has been hard at work with the map prep. We've been working on, beginning to draft the document. You can see additional opportunities for engagement meetings on the schedule. But again, the target timeline for plan adoption is May of next year. All right, and this concludes my updates. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Ms. Oden, thank you very much. Comments or questions from council members? General Maxwell?
Just for clarification, thank you for the briefing. By the way, that was good. We're efficient. We're definitely the most patient among us. So on the documents we got for the plan, you've got in plan and then you got proposed reserve. Is the in plan all in the fiscally constrained portion of the plan, and then the proposed reserves the not fiscally constrained portion of the program?
And Mr. Chair, I'm General Maxwell. That's correct. So the in-plan project list that counts towards that $16.2 billion fiscally constrained number, then the reserve list do not count towards that.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you, General Maxwell. Any other questions or comments?
I have a comment.
Mayor Diaz?
It looked like, to me anyway, when I was looking at the charts, it looked like transportation is way down versus road improvements and easier access and all this other stuff. So it kind of, I don't know, you focus on improvements of all of this, is that I guess RTA is pretty much on track as far as road access and stuff like that. That's my comment.
Thank you, Mayor Diaz. Mayor Romero?
Mr. Chair, I think that's why it's so important to note when you call out the priorities of the RMAP and the input through a survey. That's why I believe TPC was the committee that recommended you go out again because of the horrific lack of diversity in your demographics. Of course, people over 50 are going to have different priorities than people under 50. And so when it is overrepresented on your survey results, you get a result of priorities that doesn't really reflect the priorities of the diverse demographics that we have in our region. And so I believe it was TPC that recommended that you go out and try and diversify your demographics, correct? Which committees were recommending that you go out again?
If I may, it's part of our process regardless. So as you go back to the schedule, the public input process doesn't end until the very last day when there is a public hearing. So yes, of course, it's recognized that once you get the first results, then you look at where those gaps are. And that's what the staff was recommending, that we've identified these gaps and now we're gonna go out and do additional.
But you're presenting the result as though,
This ongoing.
as though all of the demographics that we want to see their input on. So Mayor Diaz, the priorities are reflective of those that completed the survey for the RMAP. And that's what I was talking about earlier in the other meeting, that those demographics are very monolithic. And so you're presenting these priorities as if the community was really well represented, and it's not. So I just want to put it for the record, these results are based on very skewed and monolithic input points through the surveys that were presented for RMAP. That was my concern in terms of the whole conversation we had about RTA outreach and engagement. We need to be able to have realistic and reflective of our demographics, survey results and engagement results for everything, not just the RTA, for everything. So I wouldn't take the results of whether you use transit or not as written in blood. It's skewed results. That's what it is.
Any other questions or comments?
I do have more questions. I'm sorry I'm delaying you, but the RMAP is a request that the city of Tucson had requested before through PAG, so that the city of Tucson could apply for $70 million this August for our bus rapid transit. We were delayed, and the process that this board had said, hey, let's start a process to update the RMAP. The inability to amend the RMAP on the side of the city of Tucson, I believe, prevented the city of Tucson from going out in August to apply for capital improvement grants worth about $70 million to bring to this region. So what exactly is the process of amending the RMAP moving forward? And is that in writing anywhere?
Following up on your question, Mayor Romero, Mr. Benavidez, you had been in communication with federal officials about this issue, and they said at my request, and I don't believe that they have given you a final response. Could you summarize for the council the communications you had with them and what we're waiting on? Because I think it's aligned with Mayor Romero's question.
For Mr. Chair, members of the Regional Council, we did reach out to the federal authorities to ask them what is the process for this. We want to make sure that we're following the right process because questions came up. So we asked them, and we kept being told, "Oh, we'll have it in a couple days," and now it's been kind of radio silent. And I haven't heard anything now. I don't know. It's been
And what was
a month and a half.
What was the agency, the person that you wrote to, represented which agency again?
ADOT, I think. Am I right? Sorry, Farhan, I can't remember. You work with them.
Mr. Chair, thank you. So Federal Highway Administration has the oversight. So FHWA, at least in Arizona, represents FTA as well. So FTA and FHWA are collaborating together to respond to Thomas's email, but I had put out a memo shortly after our July meeting that we did not meet and outline the process as we understand it. And we had previously had discussions with FHWA staff. The process that I outlined in the email was consistent with our understanding, consistent with their understanding, but for whatever reason, they have not been able to respond to the more specific question that Thomas posed to them. But please go back to the memo. I'd be happy to send it out again. The memo that I send out outlines the process for.
But the questions that Thomas posed were because there was a discrepancy between what you had put in that memo and what the city was saying were their understanding from the federal authorities that they had spoken with. That was why I had asked Thomas to get that clarification, and it's frustrating that it hasn't come in yet, because you're right. They kept saying we expect to have this in a short period of time, and we still haven't gotten it, correct?
Correct, that's correct, sir.
And having said that, Mr. Chair, again, the process is pretty straightforward. We need all the data up front. And then once we have the data, then we can sit down with FHW and FTA, and then we lay out our process. And then at that point, that's when they say, all right, you're on track, do X, Y, and Z. We have not received all the data we need, and that.
Yes, you did receive it, Mr. Mogimi. You received the information. Another question that I have is, I am actually really happy that in the 2055 RMAP, are including all the proposed RTA next projects, that we're including RBRT, the city's hopefully south leg of a transit project from Ronstadt to the airport. We are hoping that the RMAP will be completed in May of 2025. Is that correct?
That's scheduled, yes.
And what if the RTA next does not pass next November? How do we amend the 2055 RMAP?
So the assumption that's made in the RMAP is that there's going to be additional revenue and these projects will be completed. And by federal law, we can make that assumption. If it doesn't happen, by definition, it means that the revenues are not available. It doesn't mean that we have to amend it immediately, but next time around, we get a chance to update the RMAP, then we can make those adjustments. I wouldn't make any adjustments immediately. I would take another bite at the apple, and then potentially next time around, which every 4 years we update the RMAP. Then 4 years later, that's when you want to make the adjustments if needed.
You would not remove, if the RTA next, God forbid, did not pass, you would not remove the RTA next projects from the RMAP
If the
in
board,
4 years?
yeah, if the board decides to go back at least once or twice before we make that assumption, then obviously I would not make the change. So again, even now it's an assumption. There's an assumption that it's going to pass. And if that, at some point, the board needs to make that decision and say, all right, we assume that that revenue will never come. And then that's when we can make.
And you would wait 4 years to do that?
That's up to the RTA board.
The RTA board or the PAG board? Or
RTA
both?
board, because RTA board is responsible for RTA revenues.
And what would happen if any of my colleague jurisdictions would get a congressional earmark? We don't want to call them earmarks anymore. Member directed fund. I know some of my colleagues have applied for some member directed funds and have received funds that are tip named projects. In order for them to amend or update the RMAP to receive those federal funds, what would be the process for that?
So the ideal situation is that RMAP is flexible enough that it has categories, that as long as you apply for funds are within those categories, then that's an automatic, go ahead and include it in the tip. But if it doesn't meet any of those categories, then obviously we have to go through a process to amend and include those projects. So my recommendation is that as we go through the RMAP, identify anything that you anticipate to apply for to make sure it's in the RMAP, mainly because that actually even helps, enhances your application. If it's in the RMAP and it's adopted, once you submit your application, you can demonstrate that it's already gone through the regional process.
But what happens when we want to apply for funds? Maybe Oro Valley wants to apply for the capital improvement funds that are made available by the federal government. What happens if the project is not there? I mean, I'm trying to get some clear answers, Mr. Mogimi, and I'm not. And the sooner you answer, the sooner we can get out of here. But you told us it would take 9 months and that you would need environmental analysis. So what I'm trying to ask is, how can any of these jurisdictions apply for funds from the federal government and be able to update the RMAP in order to be able to show that we're fiscally constrained and that the region is willing to put it in the RMAP?
So I'll be happy to share that memo again, that the process is the same. It takes time to go through updating the fiscal constraint analysis. You have to update the land use plan. You have to update your traffic modeling. You have to go through the environmental analysis.
Now, we're doing all of those necessary requirements to include the RTA next projects and the RMAP 2025, 2055?
It's RTA next projects are included in the RMAP.
That is not my question. My question is, in order to include the RTA next projects, are we having to approve for each and every project, the land use, the impact, the environmental impact, everything that you're asking us, the city of Tucson, to include? No.
Yes, it's in the RMAP process currently as we speak.
You are not answering my question, Mr. Mogimi.
Okay.
Are all of the RTA next projects that we're including in the 2055 RMAP plan, have they gone through all of the analysis that you've requested the city of Tucson to do for the BRT project that we're trying to include in the RMAP?
Yes, they're currently going through that process. We're updating land use modeling, and then it'll go through the public process as outlined in the diagram.
For each and every one of the RTA next
In the
projects?
plan, yes, that's the list that you have in the plan. Those are the financially constrained list of projects, and RTA next projects are in that list.
That's it.
General Maxwell.
The question I've got, and I think we're still waiting to have the answer from that HWA, and so we need to keep pushing for that answer. Because I think the frustration is, in ADOT's got, for the record, ADOT's five-year plan, we do have things, right now, all of our RTA dollars are still in it. So all Maricopas are still in it. So we do take the same assumptions with our planning that the inflows of funds are going to stay the same. You only adjust it when the funding source gets turned off. So that all flows. But I think the question we're trying to get at is there's several ways to get into the 5-year plan and even some of the longer plans at the state level that don't take the entire process. I think that's what Mayor Ramirez is just trying to get at. And if we can get an answer from FHWA and what they say, then I think we can come back and talk about how any municipality could then go back, or the county, anybody can go back and insert it without having to go through the full requirement of doing all the new data allowances, the impact on other projects, the impact on the other streets. I believe there is a way to do that. And I trust that Thomas is going to beat that drum until we get an answer from them. And it is disappointing they haven't given the answer. Right now, I'll tell you, a lot of the federal agencies are moving extremely slow.
And I want to thank Thomas because he made that initial contact shortly after our July meeting. And has not gotten a timely response.
And if FHWA comes back and says, nope, you have to do this whole thing, well, that's the answer. We have to do the whole thing. But we're getting the miscommunication from them on how the process for, other than the 4-year entry, can be done in a manner quicker than a full year and a full analysis. Because if you're doing the full analysis with fiscal constraints, you got to have project costs, you got to have, it's a ton of work, as we know. So thank you.
Well, there's the process to amend is different than the process to update. And there are very specific definitions of what those means, right? And we're just not getting clear answers in terms of the ability for any of our jurisdictions to not lose out on federal funds. So we missed out on the opportunity to apply in August because of these delays. We do not want to miss out on the opportunity to apply in the springtime. And so I think we all need and deserve clarity in terms of what are the processes when any jurisdiction wants to apply for federal funds to be able to amend the RMAP to include, especially if you prove that it's fiscally constrained to what your jurisdiction can bring to the table. It shouldn't be rocket science to be able to amend and apply for federal funds to bring to the region. We don't want to lose another opportunity this spring.
Thank you, Mayor Romero. Any other comments or questions? All right, if that's the case, I'm going to adjourn this meeting, and I'm going to apologize in advance because I have things I need to get to in 13 minutes, and I think I can just make it. Thank you all.